9th of February 1960 to immigrant parents Julian and Mercedes Ramirez from Mexico. They moved to El Paso, Texas, a quit Islamic town of 500,000 people to better their lives. Richard's mother Mercedes worked in the boot factory and his father Julian worked on the Santa Fe Railroad as a laborer. Julian was not happy with his job and felt he deserved better due to his past, him being a former police officer in Mexico. This caused him to drink. He wasn't a nice person anyway. But when drunk he was worse. He would beat up his wife and slap his children, about which were Reuben, Robin, Ruth, Joseph and Richard. Being the youngest, Rick Hurd would be knocked about more than the others. When Richard was 2, a cupboard fell and cut open his forehead. He had a large gash there. When Richard was 5 he was hit in the head by a swing at school and was knocked out. After this he started having fits throughout his school years. In 1973 Richard's cousin Mike came out of the army. He was honorably discharged. He was out in the Vietnam War. It said while he was out there he was known as a serial rapes killer. Richard looked up to Mike and hung about with him all the time. He would teach Richard some army tactics, how to use shelf movements if needed and how to sneak upon people. Richard was in Mike's home and Mike got out of the cupboard a box of photos of Vietnamese women gauged and tied up, being raped, tortured, mutilated and decapitated, and in all the photos Mike was in them. On the 4th of May 1973 Richard was at Mike's and Mike was arguing with his wife Jessie, and Mike pulled out his revolver and shot her in the face. She was taken to hospital but died. Mike was arrested and sent to jail. Mike wasn't there long due to his mental health. He was placed in an asylum where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. When Mike was sent away, Richard felt very alone and constantly being knocked about by his father. Some nights he would sneak out of the house and go and sleep in the cemetery. While this was happening, Richard's sister Ruth noticed and asked him if he wanted to go and live with her and her husband Rupert. Of course he said yes. No one knew at the time, but Ruth's husband Rupert was a peeping Tom, and seeing as Richard was living with them, he would take him out night with him and teach him how to spy on women getting dressed without getting caught. It was while living at his sister's he started experimented with drugs, mainly LSD. He started listening to heavy metal, his favorite group being AC/DC. He also started worshipping Saturn and drawing pentagrams on himself, as well as learning as much as he could on the subject. In 1977 Mike was let out of the asylum. Richard would sit and have a joint with him, but then he went off to do his own thing, stealing and spying on women. However, he got caught and was sent to a juvenile detention center. When Richard was let out, it wasn't long before he got arrested again for possession of drugs. He was placed on probation. When that ended, he dropped out of school and got himself a job at a Holiday Inn. He was given a pass key to get into unoccupied rooms that needed cleaning, but Richard would enter rooms and spy on women when they were asleep and steal whatever he liked. One night he waited for a woman's husband to leave a room, then he let himself in. He was standing over the woman. When her husband came back in the room, Richard tried to run, but the man got hold of him and beat him bad. Richard lost his job but wasn't prosecuted because the couple came from out of state and didn't want to come back. Richard decided to leave El Paso and made his way to California. He lived in and out of hotels in the Tenderloin district, San Francisco, known as Skid Row, a very dangerous place full of thugs, thieves, murderers, dealers, a place where people would sleep where they fell the night before. It wasn't long before Richard was arrested and put in jail. Burr equals T not for long for stealing cars and possession of cocaine. When Richard left jail, he rented a room in a hotel in Skid Row. While looking around the hotel, he found a dark and damp basement what no one used. In April 1984, Richard was walking along when he saw a 9-year-old girl named Mei Lu looking around. Apparently she'd lost her mother's money. Richard asked if he could help. He took her hand and lead her to the basement he had found. He beat Mei Lu half to death, then he stabbed her until he killed her and hung her on a pole by her blouse. On June 28, 1984, Richard decided to act on his fantasies. In Glassell Park, he climbed through the window of 79-year-old Jenny Winkle. She'd left her window open due to the night heat. As she lay asleep in bed, she was awoken by someone in her bed with her. She could smell the stench from his mouth and his hands all over her under her nightgown. The smell of his breath making her gauge as he climbed on top of her and pushing himself inside her. When he was finished, he stood by the side of the bed. He raised his arm. She could see the shimmer of knife through the dark as it came down towards her. Then she felt the cold steel enter her over and over until she was dead. But Richard wasn't finished. He tried to decapitate her but couldn't, so he ransacked her apartment and fled. On March 17, 1985, Rosemead Maria Amandas was driving home from work. She got to her garage, got out the car to open it, when Richard, all dressed in black, ran up behind her. She turned around and a revolver was pushed in her face. She begged him not to kill her, but he took 2 steps back and shot her. She fell to the ground. Richard ran into her home and into her 35-year-old housemate Dale Okazaki. She ran and hid behind the counter for a minute, but when she stood up he shot her through the forehead. He searched for any valuables and ran outside. Maria realized she was alive. The bullet had ricocheted off her car keys, but she played dead for a while. As she stood up, Richard ran out the house. She froze. He looked at her, pulled his revolver, but then he fled into the night. The same night he made Salon Veronica to stop her car. He dragged her out and shot her twice in the face. Passerbys helped her, but she died on the way to the hospital. 3 days later Richard murdered an 8-year-old at Eagles Rock. 6 weeks later Richard returned to Monterey Park. He entered the home of 66-year-old Harold and 63-year-old Jean Hugh. Richard first shot Harold through the head, then he beat Jean, asking where the money was. He then bound her hands and tore up the place looking for anything he wanted. Then he went back to Jean and savagely raped her before fleeing into the night. Jean called the police and gave a good description of him. 85 California. It was the hottest it had been for 100 years. Not only were people extremely hot, they were also paranoid of the man the papers named the Night Stalker. On the 30th of May 1985, 41 Ruth Wilson in Burbank went to bed with her window slightly opened due to the heat of the night. Looking around, Richard saw the opened window and took advantage of it. He climbed through and made his way to Ruth's bedroom. He shone a flashlight in her face. She awoke suddenly with a shock. Richard put a revolver in her face. He made her go to her 12-year-old son's room. He then jumped on the boy's bed and pointed the gun at his head. He then handcuffed the boy and shot him in the closest. Ruth offered Richard a diamond necklace to let them go. Richard just looked at her and then ransacked the apartment. He came back to Ruth and ordered her to put her hands together and tied them. He took her to her room and pushed her on the bed. He ripped off her nightgown and proceeded to rape and sodomized her. She could smell his foul. It made her gauge. When he was finished, he got up and told her she looked pretty good for her age and he would let her live. She told him the ties was hurting her wrist. He loosened them for her. He brought her a robe and got her son out of the closet. He handcuffed them together and left. The boy broke free and ran to a call box and phoned the police. Ruth gave a very good description of him to them. The attack continued throughout Los Angeles. The people were in a state of panic. They didn't know if they were going to wake up the next morning. On May the 29th, 83-year-old Maliva Keller and her disabled sister, 80-year-old Blanche, were found in their home beaten with a hammer. He then drew a large pentagram on the wall up above Blanche's bed in lipstick. He also drew a pentagram on Maliva's thigh. He did try to rape Maliva but couldn't. It was 2 days before they were found. Blanche was still alive, but unfortunately Maliva was dead due to the savage beating she took from the hammer. 1 month later he raped a 6-year-old girl in Arcade. A day later the body of 32-year-old Paddy Aline Higgins was found in her home, also in Acadia. She was found in her home with her throat sliced from ear to ear and savagely beaten. July 5, 1985, the body of Mary Louise Cannon was found in her home in Arcata. She was beaten badly and her throat was cut, and he ransacked her home. On July 5, Richard returned to Arcade and beat 16-year-old Deirdre Palmer badly with a tire iron, but she survived. Nelson. On July 7, 1985, the body of 61-year-old Joyce Lucille Nail's son was found dead in her home at Monterey Park. She had been beaten to death with a blunt object. Later that same night, Monterey Park 63-year-old Linda Patuna was awakened by a gun in her face. Richard told her to get out of bed and go into the bathroom. After ransacking her home, he returned to rape and sodomized her, but he couldn't get an erection. He was frustrated and humiliated. He looked at her and screamed, then took her valuables and left. July 20th, 1985, Richard went to Glendale, Los Angeles. He then entered the home of 66-year-old Maximilian and his wife 66 Layla. He shot both while they lay sleeping in their beds. Then he got a knife and mutilated their bodies so bad they were just about reconcilable. Later that night, Richard went to Sun Valley. He entered the home of Kyo Hom. Richard shot him while he slept. He then raped his wife and then made her perform all sex on him. He then beat her and he tied Sakima up and sodomized her 8-year-old son and made off with their savings. On the 6th of August 1985, he entered the home of 38-year Christopher and his 27-year-old girlfriend Virginia Peterson were both shot in the head while they lay in bed. Christopher got out of bed with a bullet in his head and chased Richard away. 2 nights later, at Diamond Bar, California, where he made his way into Amencia's home, he climbed through the window, who was asleep in bed when he shot her in the head. Then he raped and sodomized her and forced her to do oral sex on him. On the 18th of August he climbed through a window in Lake Merced, a suburb of San Francisco of Per and Barbara. They were found in their blood-drenched mattress. Richard shot both in the head. Mr. Pan, a 66-year-old accountant, was pronounced dead at the scene. Mrs. Pan survived but would be disabled all her life. On the wall, Richard drew a pentagram on the wall in lipstick and the words Jack. The knife from a song named The Ripper by Judy's Priest. On the 20th of February 1985, sisters 70-year-old Mary and 50-year-old Christina Codwell from the Cow Hollow district were found stabbed to death in their apartment. Theda Welding was shot in the head at his Cow Hollow apartment, and his 25-year-old girlfriend Nancy Bryan was brutally raped. A manager from the Tenderloin Hotel came forward and told the police that he had a man stay at his hotel who fitted the description of the Night Stalker, and he said how Richard's breath smelt foul. The police searched the room where Richard stayed and found a large pentagram drawn on the back of the bathroom door. The police found and questioned a man who Richard sold Mr. Pan's jewelry to, so no, the police knew the Night Stalker's name. On August 24, 1985, Richard entered the home of a couple in Mizzen Mia, 50 miles south of Los Angeles. The couple, a computer engineer and his wife-to-be age 29 Uriah, were asleep in their beds when awoken by a noise of gunfire in their room. Uriah reached for her husband-to-be who was seriously injured. Richard got hold of her and took her to another room where he tied her ankles together with a tie. Richard then ransacked their home but found nothing. He returned to the woman and raped her twice. The stench from his mouth made her Eve. Richard got angry. There was nothing he could find of value. Uriah told him to look in a drawer. He told her to swear to satin. Richard shouted to her. She did what he asked. Richard found the money, put it in his pocket, looked back at her and screamed, "Swear you love satin." "I swear I love satin," she cried. He got hold of her and made her perform oral sex on him. After he finished, he looked at her and laughed, then fled back the way he came in. The woman watched out the window and saw him get into a car. She then reported everything to the police. It wasn't long before they found the car. They searched it and found a fingerprint. They matched it with another they found at a crime scene. They had a match. They released Richard's name to the papers. The police started to trace every move Richard made. Richard noticed he was being followed, so he tried to keep his head down. He went into a convenience store. He noticed his photo was on all the magazines and papers. A group of Islamic old people noticed him and started screaming murderer. With that, he ran onto the Santana freeway trying to get away, but the people got hold of Richard and beat him down to the ground. One of them beat him with a pole until the police got there. Richard was arrested and taken to court for the terrible crimes he had committed. While in jail, he drew a pentagram on the cell wall and on his hand in blood. On the 20th of September 1989, Richard was convicted of 13 murders,